Good morning, listeners, and thank you for joining me today for episode 665 of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. And today, folks, we are headed to the top end. We're headed to the Northern Territory. We're going to be talking about fishing a place that's quite remote and by all accounts, very special. It's an area called the Sir Edward Pellew Islands Group. And I'd have to say that this is one of the last frontiers of fishing. Now, if you're listening to this episode as it goes live on the 22nd of April, 2024, you might be forgiven for expecting that we were going to be talking about barra fishing in the top end. After all, it is a runoff. It's the prime time to fish for barra up in the Northern Territory, but we're not. We're going to be talking about dropping jigs on shallow inshore structures and chasing a species that has many names. In that part of the world, probably best known as the Saddletail snapper along the east coast, either Scarlet, Seaperch, or largemouth Nannygai, or one of probably half a dozen other names as well. Now, this is a species that looks great, pulls hard, and it's great on the table too if you want to take a fish or two home. So brace yourself for a really cool chat. Now, if you're not familiar with the Sir Edward Pellew Group, then think southwest Gulf of Carpentaria, tucked away where not too many anglers find it, and, quite a challenge to get to. So for me, coming from Cairns means a flight over to Darwin. I guess the same for people from most major centres in Australia, a flight to Darwin. From Darwin, you've got two options, I guess. You can take one of the regional flights, which don't happen every day and have limited luggage and that sort of thing, or you can drive about 12 or 14 hours from Darwin to Borroloola. From there, of course, you either take a chartered flight or helicopter across to the Sir Edward Pellew Group, or as we're going to do, you take a boat down one of the several river systems that empty into the coastline along that stretch of coast, and you can motor across. So we're not going to go all the way to the islands. We're actually going to fish the inshore zones in 15 to 20 metres of water or so. So it's quite a mission to get there. And one of the reasons that I'm telling you this is that today's episode of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast is brought to you by Jabbers Australia, which is very relevant because Jabbers bring into Australia what I reckon are some of the best travel rods on the market. Not just travel rods either. These are 4 or 5 piece rods, really, really compact, lightweight, and absolutely proven to take some serious punishment. In fact, they're so good and so reliable that I often fish with them in my own backyard now. They're one of the first rods that I go for off the rack, whether I'm traveling or whether I'm fishing at home. So we will talk about the Jabbers range in today's episode, but please take my advice if you're in the market for a fishing rod, even if you're not thinking about traveling and you're looking for something that's tough, that's durable, that'll take all kinds of punishment, as I've said, then do yourself a favour and have a look at the Jabbers range, because you never know when the next opportunity to travel and fish might come up. And if you've got rods in your range that you can use every day, and then when some amazing life-changing opportunity comes up, you can just pull them apart into 5 pieces, pack them in your bag and take off, well, you've got the best of both worlds. And keep in mind, folks, that the Jabbers rod range is available through Team Doc Lures. So whether you're a member or not a member, if you want to support the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, grab yourself a Jabbers rod at team.doclures.com. That's team.doclures.com. Check out the Tackle Collective. If you buy a rod through me and you're not a member, you'll receive a complimentary membership, but there's all sorts of other bonuses as well for buying a Jabbers rod through the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. So go and check that out, team.doclures.com. But now, folks, let's get into today's episode of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast and welcome Brad Inglis to the show.
This is the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, where our mission is to help everyday sports fishers experience extraordinary lure fishing. If next level fishing is your dream, then let us provide the tools and information that will bring that dream to life. Tune in as our expert hosts chat with Australia's best anglers and share their tips for success. Then check out our website. It's one of Australia's largest and most popular online fishing resources. But right now, settle in to listen as ALF founder Greg Doc Lures Vinyl delivers today's episode through the nerdy lens of a scientist, lure maker, and sport fishing tragic.
Hey, yo, ALF listeners, welcome to the next episode of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. Now, we're headed up to Northern Australia. I haven't talked about the top end for quite some time, in fact, but we're headed for the Sir Edward Pellew Islands, and with us today is Brad Inglis from up in the north. So, Brad, welcome to the show, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Great to be here.
Great to have you here, mate. Now, listen, you live up in the north around the Katherine area on a station there somewhere. Tell us a little bit about where you live, mate.
Yes, mate. We're a family-owned cattle station. We're 360 kilometres south of Katherine. We're Sturt Plains is the station's name, and we breed high-grade Brahman cattle. And yeah, it's not a bad place to be, mate.
Not a bad place to be at all. That close to Katherine, that close to the Gulf country, that close to so many different fishing options, mate. And I know that fishing runs through your blood just as much as Brahman cattle do. So we're going to have a good chat about that. Now, mate, before we get started, let's have a bit of a chat about you and your fishing, your bucket list species, all those kinds of things. Help to introduce you to our audience a little bit, help them to get to know you a little bit so that they know where you're coming from and understand what we're all about. You good for that?
Absolutely. I'm an avid fisherman. I'm from New South Wales originally, but grew up down there on the sort of New South Wales, south of Sydney, south coast, grew up down there, moved up here 20 odd years ago in the agricultural industry, just in the cattle industry, and working on pretty remote stations and some pretty first-class barramundi fishing. And in the early days, we were pretty wild and woolly, but now you take it for granted, I suppose, the quality fishing that we had at the time, and it just grew from there. And my in-laws semi-retired down there at Tumby Bay, down near Port Lincoln, and since then became great mates with Tom Tierney, Tumby Tom down there in Adelaide. Yep. You interviewed before, and I got the fever, mate. Can't help it.
It's one of those things, but it gets in your blood. I think back to my fishing roots, and none of my family fishes. Yeah, and back then, none of my family knew anything about fishing, and my parents bought me for $1.50 a fishing rod and reel at a garage sale, and that was the start of it for me. And I went down the local creek and was trying to catch minnows and redfin, all kinds of things. And that was the start of it. It gets in your blood, and I can't explain why, but I can't imagine not fishing these days. So that's just what it does to us. Mate, let's have a chat about, you're in a pretty amazing part of the world. As you said, it's barramundi central. You've got some of the best barra fishing waters, especially heading now into the runoff as we are. Some of the best barra fishing waters in the country at your feet, but you've got lots of other options there as well. So what other things do you like to target in your part of the world?
Luckily, where I am, I'm a few hours from 2 hours probably from any fishery, because if I did leave next to a fishery, I wouldn't get any work done. Lisa, my partner, she's up, I'd muck around with my gear here and there all the time, and I'm on the phone to a good mate at Trent at Rod and Rifle, Catherine, Tackle World, and she loves fishing as well, which is a bonus. But barra, obviously, brother-in-law had a helicopter mustering company, which he sold 2 years ago, so we're pretty spoilt there. We could fly to some pretty remote places and pretty awesome fishing. Jacks, barra. I love me grunter, me black brim. I love that. Stream, freshwater, that skinny water. Really, really like that towards Lake Argyle when I worked over that way, and some creeks over towards that way. Like some solid fish. And I think we've had that Dick Cashfield on the podcast before talking about that kind of style.
Dick's been on the podcast a few times. Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
Pound for pound. They're pretty fun, pretty awesome little fish. But yeah, we fish out in the Gulf, out in the southwest Gulf towards Borroloola. There's a little town there called Kingash Bay that we've got a shack there, and a little township there, great little community, and some access to some pretty awesome country.
I know that area, Kingash Bay. It comes up quite often on the show when I ask people about their bucket list fishing destinations, mate. It's like living in a bucket list fishing destination where you are. There's so many options. And we are definitely going to get through some of those in just a moment. But yeah, if you were to down tools, you came from New South Wales, so more of a southern sort of a climate and southern sort of fishery. If you were to head down south again, where would you want to go for a fish down there, and what species would you want to target?
Good question, mate. I would go to the Eyre Peninsula, South Australia. I would tie on a little 65 mil stick bait. I would walk around in ankle deep, knee deep water and catch yellowfin whiting. That's I don't know, you can go around here and there and catch this and catch that, but to watch a school of whiting that are 40 centimetre long come up and hit that surface lure and then fight a decent fish in shallow water, that's as good as it gets for me on light gear, and they taste all right, but just that, people look at me a bit weird, like they, you want to go catch big kingies or big Samson fish or whatever, but that for me does it.
At home.
Yeah. I don't know. I can walk around the Tumby Tom all day, and that's as good as it gets for me. And I really enjoy it. And that stealth aspect of it, and you've got to be pretty cunning, and that aggressiveness of them little fish is pretty cool.
Yeah. And look, if you're anything like me, the grass is always a bit greener on the other side, but if you're anything like me, I love living in Northern Australia, but there's something quite nice about being able to go to Southern Australia and be able to take your shoes off and wade around in ankle deep to knee deep water, not have any risk of standing on a stonefish, not have any risk of something coming out of the water and chewing on your leg.
Oh, yeah.
And you can go around and put a few casts in. That's actually quite appealing.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't worry, those pointers have got me a bit winky down there, I tell you. I've been out the groups there, the Joseph Banks groups there, whiting fish. I've always looked me eye over the shoulder and everyone's, you're used to crocodiles and that. And I'm like, don't know. Yeah. This water's a bit scarier for me, I reckon.
Yeah. It's what you're used to. I think crocodiles, in many ways, they're not to be, you don't want to get blasé about them for sure, but in many ways they're quite predictable. And so you can manage that risk pretty well and you know what to do and what not to do and where to go and where not to go. But I think sharks are a little bit less predictable.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. I don't know. And then I've never been down there in winter time, so, you know, they always say, you wait to get down there in winter, it's freezing cold. And I said, I'll leave that to you, I'll stay up here. That's
right. I mean, there's not a lot between Antarctica and the coastline of South Australia. Yeah, those winds do come off the ice caps there and across all that wide expanse of water, whipping up big swells and chilling down the air. So, yeah, it can get pretty nippy and pretty swelly in that part of the world.
Oh, yeah, different ocean there, mate.
Absolutely. Now, mate, tell us about your favourite piece of fishing technology. You got a favourite gadget that you like to rely on?
To be honest, mate, I think the introduction of side scan, I don't know, a lot of people on podcasts have spoken about it, but for what we do and what we target, especially on the reef, I fish a lot with Trent DeWitt at Rod and Rifle Catherine, and we got similar thoughts, similar beliefs, and you get a couple of good fish on one spot, and we look at each other and go, righto, there's a heap of fish there. Let's just troll a lure and let's just put that side scan out and let's just have a look. And the more and more we've done that is we've got spots there now that the likes of you come up or whoever comes up or Tumby Tom comes up or friends come up. You can go out and you can get a fish that they people blow their mind. That side scan on that 4 fish kilo in that deeper water is just a game changer, mate. Yeah. Other than that, nothing major, but definitely the side scan.
And rightly, there's been lots of excitement over the last few years with the advent of live sonar, and there's no doubt we're learning tons about fish and some amazing footage turning up of barra and cod and all sorts of things on the forward-facing sonar and all that sort of stuff. But when as a general fishing tool, the side scan sonar is still incredibly important, and in many cases more so. You've got to find the fish first. Once you've found them, then you can throw your forward scan over the side and start trying to figure out what they're doing. But that side scan is so invaluable for finding fish in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm always seem to take someone out that, and I enjoy seeing people catch fish. I really get a kick out of seeing people, not so much you're taking out novice fishermen, but the pressures of a captain on a boat. You go out and catch a decent fish, but we'll go out and I'll have a quick look for barra here, and first thing I do is the side scan, and you find fish, and you don't really need that active target and all that stuff, which we got some great mates who just are catching amazing fish with that, and they change their fishing. But the simplicity of it, and from blue water to finding barra to, it's just such a great tool. And I can't stop looking at it, to be honest. That's all I do is sit there and look at it. And where we fish, there's not huge structure. Like where we find decent fish, it's not reef fish I'm talking about. There might be a blemish, or it might be not so much a wonky hole or anything like that. It might be a little ledge, and you're 2D at pace, or you don't really pick it up. So having that sonar just really does identify those areas that you normally wouldn't see.
Yep, absolutely. No doubt about it. It changed fishing, and the idea of being able to motor along, scanning out to either side, and just putting a waypoint on pieces of structure or patches of fish or balls of bait as you're motoring along, it just really makes it easy to map out a bit of a spot where you're going to spend a few hours targeting fish. And obviously all forms of sonar have their place and have their value, but I think if I had to choose just one, certainly for the style of fishing I do, side scan would be it.
Absolutely.
But let's move on. Let's move on from the tech. Let's talk about who you like to fish with. So you've had the opportunity to fish with lots of different people over the years and take them out and show them what you do and how you do it. But who's someone that you would like to get on your boat for a day, just to cast a few lures, chew the fat, and explore fishing and enjoy the company?
Honestly, Tumby Tom's a great friend of mine. He is one of the most passionate knowledgeable fisherman and a great bloke, as in a genuine, caring, even though he's a Port Adelaide supporter.
Can't help bad luck.
I know, but honestly, mate, a day out with him and then a few bunnies after it, filleting fish, and some of the stories he's got, and it's not a bad day out with him, I'll tell you.
Good stuff. Right, mate. So I think it's about time we maybe got into talking about the species that we're going to be chasing today. What's the species we're going to be targeting?
Yeah, the saddletail snapper.
Saddletail snapper.
Malabaricus, I think it's pronounced.
Something like that. We don't want to get too scientific and too technical.
No,
Certainly
I'll go cross-eyed. But,
that's it.
But
so saddletail snapper, so one of the legianid family, stunning fish to look at and pretty good on the tooth.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people up here call them redfish or nannygai or whatever, and we get a bit slacky. Just some people call them nannies, and we just run with it. But their proper name is saddletail snapper.
Saddletail snapper.
There is in areas plenty of them. There's a lot of sort of that 40, 50 centimetre fish. They can be thick in areas, but a lot of bait fishermen, and you can catch a 40 centimetre one all day in areas which they do suffer from barotrauma. We're in that sort of 10 to 23 metres at the most. So it's not deep fishing in the Gulf. It's quite shallow.
So for those over on the east coast of Australia and North Queensland, we often refer to this fish as the largemouth nannygai or even scarlet seaperch. I think it's been called all of those things on the show at various stages. So all the same fish, but just depending on where you are in the country, they might be called different things. This is a species of fish that gets reasonably large, pulls hard, looks great, and tastes pretty good as well. So pretty much ticks all the boxes, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, they do. Different species like big finger mark, big red amp for the Gulf. Like obviously, get some bigger reds in Queensland, but we've got quite substantial reds, like big reds that people look at photos and bloody near fall over. But with the saddletails, if it's saddletails hitting jigs, they can be a bit finicky. Whereas a finger mark, they're big goldies, like 80, 75 to 80 plus.
They're going to hit it.
Yeah, they're going to hit it. But whereas if you got a day's fishing ahead of you, if you drop a jig down, bang, you got a bloody saddletail. Yeah, they can be a bit funny. And we always, me and a great mate, we fish a lot, and he always says, give it 5 minutes, 5 minute wait. And I'm a bit like, there's fish there, there's fuzz there, that's not biting. And he over the years, he's proved me wrong, but yeah, you just give it that 5 minutes, and a bit of activity creates activity. And they're funny, to get a big one, I'm talking 80 plus, they'll either hit you or they won't. They're a little bit funny, whereas, that sort of smaller fish, you can throw your bait down, but I refuse to take bait on my boat. I'm a bit of a...
Yeah, excellent. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, yuck. And that's get on good and, persevere. Big on bloody, just find a bit of structure or a blemish or something on the side scan, come back over it with the 2D or the down imager and on a split screen, and we drift a lot. I don't very rarely anchor. Sometimes if there's a bit of drift, I'll drop my anchor, like an anchor in the water, probably 10 foot, just to help with that drift. But and we just, if they're there, we just keep trying, and all of a sudden, bang, you're on, bang, you're on, bang, you're on. Then they'll come around. They just seem to get a bit excited, create a bit of excitement, and they seem to come around. They're a funny species,
Well, all fish, and I don't know much about this species, but all fish read each other's body language. So if one gets excited and they're in a school environment, they can sense that. Yeah, it's the same as, you think about people the same, really. You go to a party and everybody's really somber and quiet, it's going to be a pretty boring party. If you got a couple of people that are a little bit lively, they tend to lift everybody else along with them, and it finishes up being a better party. But fish are a bit the same. So if one of them has been spooked for whatever reason, the others will read the body language, and they become spooked as well. And conversely, you can be targeting them and they're not interested, and all of a sudden one will pipe up and it might get interested in your lure, and the next thing the whole school starts to light up. So it happens with a lot of species, so I'm not overly surprised about that. Tell me a little bit about whether the saddletail are mixed in with other species, mate. Do you find them in amongst fingermark? Do you find them in amongst, reef jacks? What other species turn up with them?
Definitely fingermark and like the big goldies and the odd red emperor. We seem to catch them, but you just get the odd one. And I found you get a big saddletail or a big red, your line seems to run out like a shark for, say, that first initial run. It might run out 10 or 20 feet on an angle. Whereas a finger mark just seems to get angry and just try and bury you and straight up and down. Whereas a big red or a big saddletail will seem to hit you and then take a run out wider, either out or wide. And that first 20 seconds is pretty intense in shallow water. And whereas the finger mark just seem to just want to punch on, and they just fight a little bit different.
It's a bit like a jack, aren't they? They're just thugs.
Yeah, you know? yeah.
They just want to slug it out, whereas the saddletail tend to run a bit.
Yeah, I found that when you hook a big dewie or something, and they do that initial run, and they'll do that. They'll run a little bit, and they've got a tail that's deep as buggery, and they've got some pull. They really do.
Yep. Let's have a chat about how we go about finding these fish, mate, because it's fine to say we motor along and we look for little irregularities or imperfections on the side scan, and then we come back over on the 2D, but there's a lot of water out there, mate. So you must have a few places to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Like with King Ash Bay, during the dry season, a lot of people, a lot of car topper style fishermen, but there was a lot of blue water guys come up, and there's a big, huge river system there, a lot of barramundi fishery, huge areas where you can get a bit bamboozled, but you get out to the mouth of a river, of the MacArthur or the Crooked Creek, and then you get out there, and next thing there's a big group of islands, and you get like, where do we go now? So it's quite daunting for some people, and it's a fairly long day trip if they're doing a day trip. But I think when I was young, there was another lady who was a old veteran fisherwoman. She was a great old lady. Like you could write a book about her, mate, some of the yarns. And I remember just seeing some fish of hers when I was young, and I was like, heck, like these nannies that I never saw. Nannies, here we go. The saddletails that I not even.
I converted you, mate. You're an East Coaster now.
That's it. No, I'm not a Queenslander. I've been called worse, but I'm not a Queenslander. I've been called a Queenslander before. And I've seen fish that she had, and it just took us a lot of years. And out wide of these islands, there's these shoals out in the Gulf, like between Groot and where we are, and then over towards Mornington, there's shoals everywhere. So people get there and they think, we got to get out to these shoals. We've got to get wide. But you don't have to. But you've just got to do the time. Try and find that little bit deeper water, but because the Gulf's fairly shallow. But in that area, there is pockets of deeper water. But just do the miles. I've been looking at, Google Earth and looking at the islands and looking at landforms and just thinking, let's just search this area today, similar to what you guys do over there for their wonky holes and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's pretty simple stuff. And Lisa, my partner, she loves catching mackerel. You just put a lure in, and I'm just looking at the screen. She's bloody focused on the rod, and we trail for sailfish or whatever, and just looking at structure and marking this and marking that. That's pretty well it, mate. Time on the water and time on looking at your side scan. That's about it.
And always a good thing to do. If you're exploring a new area and you've got the time and you don't have marks, then definitely go and do some trolling. You can pick up a few fish along the way and have a bit of sport and a bit of fun as you go. You've got that opportunity, as we said, with the side scan, scanning out to either side of the boat. Quite a distance out to either side of the boat, you're covering some pretty big swaths of seabed, and you can mark all those spots.
Yep.
And if you look at the bathymetric charts as well, get onto your Navionics or something like that. That'll give you some clues as well. And certainly that's what we do on the East Coast when we're looking for wonky holes. There's some indicators to look for on a Navionics chart that will give you a bit of an idea of where to start. Narrow the amount of water down that you need to go and explore, and then away you go and do a bit of trialing, a bit of scanning until you find places to fish. That's a good strategy. Now, mate, people do the same thing here, I have to say, when you talk about heading out to those shoals and going out wide. The number of places on the East Coast, in North Queensland at least, where you can be out in 15 and 20 metres of water fishing a wonky hole and just watching the boats whiz by all day as they zap out to the reef, and they're going another 20 k's further out, 30 k's further out, 40 k's further out, and they're going straight past a big pile of nannies and fingeries and coral trout and all sorts of things that are sitting on these wonky holes. It's not always about getting out wide and getting into the deepest water you can. It's about finding the right structure, mate. And it sounds like you've got that down to a T.
Yeah, me and a couple of mates, and we had a real kick out, and you do find a spot and you just look at each other and go, holy, like you get a couple of 80 centimetre finger marks or 75, 80, and you just look at each other and go, righto, let's leave that for next time. And you just think, high five and go, beauty, put that in the back pocket and don't tell anyone. And it really, I see some people go fishing and you see this Facebook or whatever, and they send you photos, and it's the deck of the boat's full of 30, 40, 50 centimetre fish, and you think, yeah, great, mate, that's cool. But I don't know, I think I'm getting softer as I get older. I'm a bit of an animal lover, mate. I think it's more of a thrill of getting a reward of doing that time and doing them miles and seeing these beautiful old fish, and we look at each other and go, oh, Jesus, look, that goldie. I got one with Tumby Tom come up, and he was 78 a couple of years ago. He's 80 this year, but he got an 81 goldie on a jig and it stretched him. And then both of us were like, Jesus, that fish must be old. You know what I mean? Like, a few more fishermen think like that and operate like that, because it's going to be a better place for everyone instead of this whole freezer-filling sort of macho-ness. And that's how we operate, mate. And I get a kick out of it, get enough to look after a few people around here, and because of a lot of barra trauma. And I don't know. I think I'm getting a bit bloody soft, mate. But anyway, it's good, I reckon.
It doesn't sound like a cow cocky to me, getting a bit soft.
Oh, no. That's right. I'm bloody hopeless with the cows, mate. I'm worse with the cows. I bloody love them. I can't bloody. Yeah. Anyway.
Not to worry. No, but you make a good point. And all of the Luganates have a tendency to be a bit prone to barra trauma. Now, you're fishing in 10 to 23 metres is your kind of depth range that you're operating. It's not super deep, but it's deep enough. And particularly with a big fish, as it starts to tire out and you start to grind it up towards the surface, that they will develop barra trauma. And these Luganates, all the Luganates, are rather prone to that. So it's important to think about conservation, think about fish for the future, and make sure you don't overdo it. Another thing, I don't know, do you use a release weight or anything like that to try and send the fish?
We're in that 10, there's a couple of spots of about 10 to 14 metres. And no, I've been down off South Australia with the Samsons and they use it, and what a great idea and all that. But I don't know, mate, if I'm getting a heap of fish, I just move, go do something else.
Yeah.
Troll for a trout or something like that, you know?
Yeah. There are species that is susceptible, and I suspect, and we'll probably never know because it's hard to get any hard data on it, but I suspect the release weight's going to be of limited value in, you're still going to have a high mortality rate, I suspect, with these fish because of their susceptibility to barra trauma. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
But the wise thing to do, as you say, go and get a feed by all means, have a bit of fun, stretch your arms, and then go and target coral trout or GTs or sailfish or one of about 1 billion other species. You've got plenty to choose from up there. So go and chase something else. It's a little hardier.
Absolutely. You go and catch a 20-pound or like a decent brassy trevally or something like that, and people soon get sick of that. They do that once and go, let's
done it now.
Absolutely. Trolling for coral trout's pretty productive. And a lot of times you're taking someone out that we got a lot of friends that live remotely, and for them to go home for 3 or 4 months with a bit of decent fish in the freezer, and also it's probably every time we go down to South Australia, I always bring back some cryovac King George whiting, and there's not a better bartering tool than Northern Australia, I tell you.
That's the thing. And look, as I say, it's important not to overdo it, but it's also important to recognise that a lot of people, if they're not catching the fish and taking it and eating it, they're paying someone to catch it and take it and eat it, right?
Yeah.
So that it's either amateur fishing or it's commercial fishing. So no problems with taking a feed whatsoever. But we do need to be cautious about damaging our stocks, particularly those species that are a little bit sensitive. Now, mate, let's change tack here a little bit, and it's going to be an interesting part of the conversation that we're about to have, because I want to talk to you about the tackle you use, and I'm going to focus firstly on rods, reels, lines, and leaders. So tell us about the gear that you take out to target saddletail.
Yes, I know I listen to a lot of podcasts, and you got the genuine guys that are sponsored, and that's all they mention. But long story, me and a great mate, Australian distributors for Jabbers Fishing, which is owned by a great friend of mine called Isaac Teng from Singapore, who was market manager for Mustard for a lot of years, and since started his own company. But we use a Jabbers fishing rod, and they're a 5-piece travel rod. There's everything from bass, whiting to brim to black bass to giant tarpon being caught, everything on a 5-piece travel rod. So, I've got a rod called a Jabbers Wonderlust, which is a PE3 overhead. It's got an extension on its butt, so we can catch a barra with it on the way out. And I'll use a Shimano Trank 300 with that crank power handle on it. And when I'm jigging, or I can just swap out I just use a dialer HRF or a Dyer Steez, but you can flick the barrow. It's it's probably a heavier barrow rod. Like it's probably a 6'5". It's a great rod if you're like probably heavier trolling or there's a big barrow end in structure. It's great for that. But I've tried a lot of jigging rods and that, and I cannot stop using it. This has a big punishment and big fish, and it just loves it. And it loads nice. It's easy to use. It's light. You can use it all day. You can jig with it all day. And it's a 5-piece, but having that butt extension that you can tuck under your arm, and then having a dual rod that you can go flick for barrow with either in the morning or the afternoon, it's a pretty awesome bit of gear, mate.
Yeah. And look, in full disclosure, I'm doing some bits and pieces with you guys, and there's a good reason for that. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. I've got a Wanderlust right here in the studio. I'm looking at it right now. And I have to say, my wife gave me a bit of a strange look when I said I was getting a butt extension, a rod with a butt extension. That caused some rather quizzical sort of looks until she realised I was talking about fishing and I was off the hook. But yeah, a tremendous bit of gear. And look, one of the things, I'm very old school. And so for me, always it's been about 1- and 2-piece fishing rods, right? Because multi-piece fishing rods, there's multiple places they can break. So that's been my mentality, but it stemmed back from the days when that was actually the case. And I've never really updated my thinking. Since I met you guys, I've had the opportunity to use a couple of the Jappers rods. And so I have mentioned them to ALF listeners in the past, in the recent past at least. And to my delight, what I've discovered is 1-piece, 2-piece, 4-piece, 10-piece, it doesn't matter, right? The technology is so good in the blanks these days in terms of strength, in terms of responsiveness and all that kind of thing. Yeah, they fish just as well, if not better, than single-piece or 2-piece rods, but they've got the advantage that you can pull them apart and pack them down into a 45 or 50 centimetre case, stick them under the seat of the car, throw them in your suitcase, whatever you want to do, which means you can take a rod anywhere. So that's terrific, and it's been a bit of an eye-opener, and this is probably not a surprise to some people who do lots of travel fishing, but for me, I've lumbered around with rod tubes and things under the false premise that I needed a 1- or 2-piece rod for strength and durability and performance. Not the case. The other thing, though, that I've really enjoyed about the rods that I've so far experienced in the Jappers range, and I've got a few of them here that I've been experimenting with, is just the design is very innovative. Right, so as you say, with the Wanderlust 6'5", basically it's a heavy bait cast, right? And so if you're slinging lures that meet a barrow, you're slinging lures that meet a cod, meet a jewfish, those sorts of species, kingies even, it's well set up for that. But then you add the butt extension, suddenly you've got a jigging rod. Now, you may want to switch out your reel. I think if I was using it specifically for jigging, I'd probably put something on there like an Osha jigger, or my favourite is the Akuma Kavala 2-speed. Fantastic little reel. So you can use it then as a dedicated jigging rod. But as you say, with the right bait cast reel, and I've got a Daiwa Tatula on mine, you can cross over. And so if you're doing a bit of travelling, suddenly you've got in one rod a heavy flicking rod that can handle just about anything and a light jigging rod that can handle just about anything. And so you've got all your bases covered with one rod, which is really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love how it loads, and it's easy. And I've had some rods where a little bit uncomfortable to use, whatever. But you can put that much hurt on this thing. It is crazy. And unless you hand it to them and they use it, and then you start pulling it apart, people look at you like their eyes pop out of their head. But also, Greg, having that, any section's replaceable. So if you're doing that, go on that trip of a lifetime or that yearly boys trip or whatever, you can buy a tip for 20% of the rod cost. They're not expensive, and you've got that reassurance. Or if shit happens, I'd be a liar if I haven't broken anything, but you can replace any section. And the amount of guys that have just rang up devastated, I did this, I did that, and no worries, mate. All cool. And they just can't believe it. They're not up for a whole new rod cost. And like Lisa, my partner, she's not even 50 kilos, and she's caught 80+ centimetre fish, and whether it's goldies or whatever, and that's her thing. That's it. She just grabs that rod, looks at me, tells me to go away, and that's it. That's all she uses. That's what I was saying. It's easy to use. It's easy on yourself, and you can go and catch a barrow with it. And it's, I don't know. It's like, mate, from Jabbers. I've met intelligent men in the fishing industry, but he is the real deal. Everything he does is spot on. There's no shortcuts, terminal gear. Everything is just Mickey Mouse, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. Otherwise, we wouldn't be.
Yep, fantastic. And look, as I say, it's been a real eye-opener for me. I've really enjoyed playing around with some of the rods in the Jabbers range. When you mentioned pulling a lot apart, I had a mate come over. I was telling you to your offsider, Nathan, a little while back, that I had a mate come round and we were just having a couple of beers and we went out the front of the house and I said to him, I have a few flicks. We had just a casting plug, a few flicks for this. We put a bucket down the other end of the yard and he's trying to cast into this bucket. And he's finished and I pulled the rod apart into 5 pieces and he just stood there and looked at me with this kind of blank look on his face. Didn't realise it was a multi-piece rod. Yep. It just it handled exactly the same.
Yep.
Of course, the acid test is when you've got a big fish on, but no shortage of results with Jabba's rods. As you said, lots of very tough species. And in fact, the species we're talking about today is one good example of that on the Wanderlust. Anyway, we're getting a little bit off track here. We are talking about fishing for saddletail, but I do get a bit excited about the Jabba's range. It's something that I've just recently come across and certainly quite chuffed with the way they perform. So you will hear more about them, folks, in due course. Don't you worry about that. But let's get back, mate. So we've got your rod now. We know you've got a PE3 jig rod. It's the Jabba's Wanderlust. Then you've got your, what reels did you say? Sorry, you had on the
Shimano Tranx 300 I use on that.
Tranx 300, that's right. Yep, with the power handle on it.
Or a Tatula 300, similar.
Same
styles. Because we're not deep, we don't need the line capacity.
Massive line capacity, yep. Okay, and those reels also give you the advantage that you can flick with them as well. So as you're going out the river, you can be flicking for barra.
Yep.
And then when you get out to your spot, you can jig with them as well. So that's pretty handy. Mate, talk to us about lines and leaders. What do you set your gear up with?
Yeah, probably 40 pound, maybe. I wouldn't fish anymore. And probably that, 55 pound Snyder, maybe 60 pound.
Okay.
Anything any fluorocarbon, bit of Snyder. I'm not too fussy. I wouldn't, if I know there's big fish there, I might bump it up to 80 pound, but there's not huge structure. It's just probably more, when the leader gets thick and heavy, I just don't see that jig being as natural as it can be.
We're going to have a talk about jigs in a moment, but I'd imagine using fairly small jigs in that depth of water.
Yeah, around probably average 60 to 80, and then if it's one of them finicky days, I'll just bump it back to 40, and there's not too much run, and I find that really does. Them days where you know they're there and you're just like, oh, and I'm dedicated not to putting bait on, I'll just drop it down, and I find that gets a few results, mate. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the reason I ask that question, of course, is the lighter the lure, the lighter your leader needs to be for you to be able to get action out of that lure, particularly if you're slow pitching. You want to be able to get that lure to come up and flutter down without being impeded by the line.
Yeah.
And obviously the more drag that's there, the less you're going to get of that. Do you get much run? You mentioned that you get a bit of run sometimes.
Yeah, not too bad. Like the Gulfs might be a 2-point-whatever metre tide at the very most. The Gulf's pretty good. You get fairly small tides. Some areas you'll get a bit of run with channels and all that kind of, just different areas will run more water than others. But It's not too bad. It's really, I don't know, I freak out like the Kimbleys and the Darwin and all these big tides. But where we are, mate, we're pretty lucky. Easy fishing.
Yeah. So the run where it does occur is typically associated with the tide. Over here on the East Coast, we can have run that's completely independent of the tide. So it's the East Australian current, obviously, and it really comes down to how close it is to the coast on a given day and whether you get an eddy, and that can change the direction of the flow as well. But it doesn't seem to matter too much about whether it's a big tide or a small tide quite often. Whether you get run is completely driven by something different. So that's not the case where you are, obviously.
No, and it's funny. There's some spots where you go and you say, I never guarantee anything, but I'll be like, oh, this is where old mate got that big red ant, and this is where this, and you go there and not a zack. And the amount of times I've written in my diary, I've written this, I've done that, different times a year, and you've just got to move and move and move, and you'll find something. Like in the areas that you know, and every time's different. Saying that, I've caught good fish in the same spot, but it's never in the Gulf.
Obviously, we're going to be dropping jigs in these areas with the style of fishing you're talking about. What sort of jigs are you dropping down?
Yep. We got I know this sounds bad because I don't want to plug all the Jabbers stuff, but
No, go ahead. I'm happy to do it. We always encourage our guests to tell us what they're actually using. Those sponsors, and some people bring the gear in.
We've got a product called the Jabbers Moxie Sparkle, which is just a sort of flutter jig that it's raised keel on one side that's quite pronounced and pretty unique colours and action. It's really, you've got to, when we drop it down, we hold onto the line and let it run through your fingers so it gets down quicker. Otherwise, it just flutters all the way down, and it's really effective. Been testing them and using them, and better than we thought, actually. And Trent brought it off Catherine, and we were just looking at each other going, how good's this? Like, these are sick. And rigged with quality gear and quality assist hooks. So there we use them, and there's another one called the Moxie Flutter, which is a different profile. It's just a different descent, but it's really good as well. But Isaac, when he worked for Mustard, he developed the Mustard Ink Vader. And with Mustard, that was his brainchild. And
okay, yeah.
It's a funny lure. It's an expensive lure. I've got a couple great photos that I can send you. With Isaac, when he came over, we went out and he scored some 80-plus centimetre fish with the 200-gram Ink Vader. Yeah, that was pretty productive.
Even in shallow water at 200 grams. So, yeah. I mean, the typical rule of thumb is 2 grams for every metre of depth.
It was a big one. Yep, smashed it. And I think any of those jigs are jig, really, but some have better actions than others, and some are rigged with better terminals gear than others, but that's what we use, mate. And, say 40 to 80 grams. Sometimes I might use something that if there's a bit of run or might be a bit heavier, but we also do throw on the old 5 to 9 inch Z-Mans. We like using Z-Mans just because they last. Okay. On a sort of 28, 42 or 56 gram jig head on an 8.0, 7.0 and 8.0. There's nothing better than that little old jig going down and next thing just like it just, I don't know, there's not much better feeling than that, I don't reckon.
No, I agree. It's one of my favourite things to do is drop jigs on the reef or on a bommy or a rock.
Yeah, listen to someone squeal.
It's awesome fun. Yeah. Now, I want to just delve into a little bit how you work the jig. It's one thing to drop, and you made a really great point with a slow pitch jig. With a high speed jig, you can open the bail, or in the case of an overhead as you're using, you can click it out of gear and let it go, and it's just going to plummet to the bottom like a rock. With a slow pitch jig, it's going to flutter, and it's going to take a long time to get down there. So feathering that line, running it between your fingers or putting your thumb on the spool to feather it so that jig stays vertical will actually get it down a lot faster. Once it's down there, mate, tell us how you work it.
Yeah, I'll just do half turns and let the rod tip do the action. But probably got more into, with these fluttery style of jigs that we've got and other people have got as well, but I've been lifting my rod tip quite high and just letting that jig do its work on the way down. I haven't been pitching. I was right into it for a lot of years, but I was just seeing those jigs go down and just their action. Each jig's different, but I think I've been probably more lifting my rod tip up high and just letting that jig come down, do that for 10 or 20 feet, let it drop right to the bottom, change it up. Probably with the 40 gram jigs, I might be a bit quicker, a bit more erratic, just to try and excite something. But yeah, like you said, mate, getting to the bottom, otherwise you're up a bit high, you get a golden trevally, which is pretty cool. I'll catch you all day, but if you're there to catch a big saddletail, or as you bloody Queenslanders call them, Nannygai, but yeah, you got to get them down, and I think first to the bottom wins most of the time.
Yep, absolutely. And mate, I think we kind of fish slow pitch a little bit differently in Australia than what the Japanese who invented the technique do. But I think the technique that you're talking about, where you lift the rod up and then you're basically letting the lure flutter down unencumbered. You're keeping the lines loose, but you're still in contact with the lure. If it's not a lot of loose line there, but the line's not tight enough to actually cause any drag on that lure. So I think that's called long fall from memory.
Yep.
And that can work pretty well. And then the pitching, of course, is that sort of quarter or half or full turn of the reel, where you basically, the rod tip's doing the work. So the reel turns, the rod tip bounces the lure up, and then it flutters back down. Bounces it up and flutters back down. And I think either way is valid. I found, and tell me if you found the same thing, but I found with coral trout on the East Coast that seems to work better if the jigs work a bit faster. So it's not quite working it as fast as a high-speed jig, but certainly a bit faster than what most slow-pitch jiggers would do in Japan, for example, where the technique was developed, or over in the US where they're fishing for bass groper and those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the Gulf, the finger mark is quite prolific. Sometimes I know that sounds really bad. Like a lot of people would kill to catch a 70, 80 centimetre plus finger mark, but they're an angry fish. And if to try and get through them to get something else, it's quite difficult. And found, just to get it to the bottom. And I really found with that 40 gram, was that going down in size, a bit more erratic action just does seem to attract a bite more so than a bigger jig, slower action. I've gone away from, if I can fish light, I will.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Cool. Mate, we probably should have a quick chat about fishing those soft plastics. So you mentioned the Z-Mans. Any preference there? So 5 to 8 inch soft plastics. Z-Man's obviously a good choice because
5 to 7, 8, 9 inch. Yeah, the bigger ones.
Yep. How do you fish those?
Yeah, just the same style, mate. Bounce down, lift them, bounce around. I just like the Z-Mans. It's a material that when you're looking at these sort of critters, they can destroy sort of plastics fairly quickly. But
you can chew them up pretty quick.
Yeah, and we've got a jig head, a data jig head, which does descend quickly up to 56 grams from down to 3 grams. They're a pretty unique keeper on them, but that sort of prevents your plastic sliding back. And they're a 5X rated hook, so they can handle a bit of pressure. Like we've got guys that sort of fish that active target in Darwin, but man, blokes catch some fish, and these jig heads stand up to it. And they really do in the blue water. Like, it's a funny market. It's hard to find a blue water jig head.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've got them, and that's what we use.
In terms of the plastics themselves, are we talking jerk shad type things with a split fork tail, or are we talking something that can be worked around fairly quickly and bounced up and down close to the bottom?
Yeah, pretty well get down quick with an action that you can get down there, and not too much of a paddle tail, more of a jerk shad. We usually use, and we don't usually use any scents or anything like that. I've got a good yarn about that. Scents. You want to hear it?
Go on. I want to hear the story. Come on.
A couple of blokes went on a Tumby Tom's mates. They went from Geelong, great blokes. They went on a charter out of Coffin Bay, and the late Gary Barmby, who had angling adventures, and on the back of the boat at night, and the dips and the cheese platter and the fruit platter and all that, and great bloke from Geelong. I'm not going to mention names. You got to try this, mate. This is the best dip ever. So he's grabbed the biscuit and dipped it and ate it, and he's screwed his face up, and he's, it's a bit oily. And they'd squeezed a tube of that S Factor into this little bowl, and mate. He'd end up telling him, and he knew spewed. But so we don't do that, just in case those yarns happen to me.
A few years back, I did interview Benny Diggles, who obviously was involved with the development of S Factor, and I remember Frank Prokop telling me, Ben used to eat the stuff, and when I questioned Ben, he said, that was back in the days when it was made in Australia. I was happy to eat it because I knew what was in it, but I'm not sure I'd eat it now, so very good. All right, mate, look, you've given us some great information. We're going to start to wrap this up now, but I guess what I'd like to do is finish up by having a bit of a chat about the things that we can try, obviously, if the fishing's a little bit quiet. And we all have days like that. You turn up, you might be able to see fish on your side scan, and you might be able to see them on your down scan. So there's fish there, but for whatever reason, they're not chewing. What advice would you have for us, mate, for putting a few fish in the boat on those quieter days?
I just move, mate. Just move and move. There's big areas and big grounds. Just don't get disheartened. Just keep trying. Don't give up. Don't think, they're not biting, I'm going to throw some bait on. Just keep trying. Sometimes they have had blokes in the boat, and you catch a Spanish flag or a stripey, and next thing I'll catch a fish on a jig. Next thing I'll catch a fish. Like, you just got to keep cracking, keep moving. Move more, catch more, I reckon. Okay,
that's cool. It's horses for courses, because if you're fishing heavily pressured waters and fish are scarce and you find a pot of fish, then you're going to stay on them and you're going to keep working them unless you think you've spooked them or that you've shut them down. You're going to continue working them because you haven't got that many options. But in a place like we're talking about here in the Sir Edward Pellew Islands area, you can just keep moving around and finding new pods of fish until you find a patch that's firing, until you find fish that are going to eat. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I find that everything can be quiet and then suddenly it's like someone's thrown a switch, and whether it's a tide change or a wind change or the current change, I don't know what's going on, but suddenly you can go from couldn't turn a scale to every drop you're getting a hit. Yep. And so unless you persist, you're not going to find that. You're not going to achieve that.
Absolutely. So. And because you get a lot of people, but during the wet season when we fish a lot, because during the dry we work a lot, and southeasterlies are a hindrance there, and you get a lot of people that go there with their chest out and their gung-ho attitude, and they come away after 4 or 5 days and they go back, I'm going back to Dundee, I'm going back to Darwin, and I think, okay, mate, no worries, all good. And I think to myself, beauty. But, and it can be disheartening, but you've just got to put the miles in. You have to just keep dropping. And then the more time you're driving around, scratching your head, just get your look and fish, get your gear in the water, mate, and then I love the area. I love not seeing a boat before. I love that remoteness. But it is a tricky area. We got fish where people just look at you and go, what the? Which is great. But, you know, we want to keep that sustainable forever. That's our goal. And,
of course.
And it's a beautiful area. It's one of the most scenic, different landscapes you've ever seen. There's a lot of naval history there. You go and catch some quality reef fish and go and catch 100 barra in 3 hours later, and it's a pretty special part of the world.
It could be better. Mate, thank you. It's a part of the world that is probably not on the radar for a lot of people. It's probably on the radar for a few more people now as a result of this conversation. But thank you for taking us to your part of the world and sharing with us your knowledge on how to target saddletail snapper, mate. Fantastic conversation. We've had lots of great information shared. Of course, guys, if you're interested in checking out the Jabbers range, you can go to jabbers.com.au. Is that correct, Brad? Or is it jabbersaustralia.com.au?
Yep.
jabbersaustralia.com.au. If you want to support the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, I will have the Wanderlust and also the other rod that I've been playing around with, which is the Urban Beats Deft Flicker. They're on my website, so you can purchase through me, get a membership thrown in, a few other bits and pieces thrown in as well, and support the podcast and get what I reckon is probably one of the best rods that you're going to find anywhere, certainly in terms of travel rods that I've used, right up there with the top shelf stuff and not at top shelf prices. So go and check that out over at doclures.com. I'll put a link in the show notes for this episode. You can go straight to where I've got those rods in the Team Doc Lures store and go and check them out. So, Brad, once again, mate, it has been absolutely brilliant getting to chat with you about fishing a remote part of Australia that I knew very little about and still know very little about, but certainly now am very enthused about finding out a bit more about it and perhaps experiencing it for myself. So thank you for coming along. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and being so generous with that. And we look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, good on you, Greg, and we better change that, mate. I need a good deckhand. But honestly, mate, we appreciate everything you do, and I know the broad audience does, and you fill in a lot of lonely days up here for me, mate, and I appreciate everything you do.
I'm pleased to keep you company, mate, so thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Good on you, Greg. Thanks, mate.
Thanks for listening to the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. For free show notes, downloads, tools and resources, please visit our website on doclures.com or consider supporting the show by joining Team Doc Lures to receive exclusive members-only episodes, tools and resources. But for now, tight lines and may the fish be with you.